Hey guys, welcome to Just Be Creative. I'm Josh Man. Today we're going to review the second part of Tom Sawyer's Adventures. Now on our last part, and welcome to Just Be Creative by the way, and on our last part, Tom was just feeling like it was a tough time. So now we're going to hear the second part. So let's get started. Ready? Ready? Let's have some fun.
For hours on end. Soon I said to myself, Huck, this is no life. I had to do something, so I hatched a plan. I knew that Pap was going to be away for a while. I waited until he had left and snuck the wood-chopping axe under my sack. As soon as he was far enough away from the shack, I chopped at the lock on the door. I could have just run away there and then, but I had to make sure Pap wouldn't follow me. The only way he would leave me alone is if he thought I was dead. So I had to make him, and everyone else in town, think that was just what had happened. I turned the crate over and threw the mug and plate around to make it look like there had been a fight. I took the axe and smeared it with the blood from a pig Pap had tied up outside. I even pulled out some of my own hair and stuck it to the bloody axe. When Pap came back, he would think I was a goner. I grabbed the last chunk of bread and a flask of water from the hut and ran to the river.
Pretty smart.
Pap's raft was tied up, so I took it and sailed over to Jackson Island as quickly as I could. My neck ached from looking back so often to see if I had been spotted. Jackson Island was a place not many people visited if they could help it. It was thick with trees, and I knew I could lay low while I figured out what to do next. Finally, I cut the strings of Pap's raft so that it would break up and float in pieces down the river. I was free. Chapter 5. For 3 whole days, I lived the perfect life. I spent my time fishing, cooking on a campfire, and sleeping under the stars. You might not believe it, but I found the woodland floor just as comfy as Widow Douglas's feather bed. Once or twice, I had to hide from a grown-up who might have recognized me. But mostly, it was just me and the river. Then, one night, I spotted another campfire. Someone was roasting fish from the river. I was terrified it might have been Pap, but this man was taller. As I got closer, I could see it was a familiar slave. "Jim!" I cried. Jim span round with a look of pure fear on his face. "Huckleberry Finn?" he asked, as though he had seen a ghost. I soon realized that must have been just what he thought I was. "Yes, Jim, it's me," I said. At that moment, I realized how much I had missed seeing a friendly face. "Everyone in town thinks you're dead, Huckleberry," Jim said, grasping me by the shoulders. For a second, I feared Jim was going to take me back to town. But then I noticed his campfire again. It looked like Jim was hiding out, too. "Jim, what are you doing out here? Why aren't you at Widow Douglas's place?" Jim let go of my shoulders and looked down. "I've run away, Huckleberry," he said, quietly. I was shocked. I had never heard of a slave running away before. I knew Jim would be in an awful lot of trouble if he got caught. "What'd you want to do something like that for?" I asked. Jim explained. "I overheard Miss Watson saying she was going to sell me to a big house upstate. If I get sold, I won't see my wife or my family no more." Suddenly I understood. The slaves were the property of Miss Watson and Widow Douglas. It was up to them if they kept or sold them. It didn't matter to the owners that the slaves were married or had children. This was how it had always been in St. Petersburg. But now I could see how terrible it must be for Jim. "I'm making my way to Cairo in Illinois," Jim said, a flicker of hope returning to his eyes. "From there I can get a ship that will take me to the parts of America where slaves are free." I nodded. It was a good plan. As soon as Jim was a free man, he could earn enough money to come back to St. Petersburg and free his family, too. As long as he wasn't caught before. A slave making his way hundreds of miles down the Mississippi on his own was going to be hard. Someone was bound to notice him. "How about I come with you?" I said. sitting down by Jim's fire and staring at the fish he had cooked for his supper. "I'll help you get to Cairo." Jim beamed. He knew, just as I did, that if we were going to get away, we would be better off together. Chapter 6. The following day, the rain came. When the rain comes down hard by the Mississippi, it means only one thing: flood. The river had risen as high as Jim's camp and washed away the small shelter he had made. We huddled under a tree and watched as capsized boats, trees, and all sorts flowed down the river. "Look," I said, as I saw a sturdy canoe on its way towards us. Jim looked at me and nodded that he understood what I was thinking. At the moment the canoe was about to pass us, I jumped and landed hard in the middle. Jim reached out his long arms and pulled the boat to the bank. After the rain had settled, we took the canoe out. I told Jim to stay low, just in case anyone spotted us. The devastation of the flood was all around. Carts, boats, and stripped-out trees bobbed in the murky water alongside us. Then we saw a very strange sight. A whole house was tilted to one side, washed into the river up to the second floor. "Have you ever seen such a thing?" I asked. "We should take a look," said Jim. "There could be food inside." We tied the canoe to the side of the house and managed to scramble through a window. The second floor of the house looked as though someone had just stepped out for a moment. The table and chairs were still upright, and the beds were made up. If it hadn't been for the water lapping up the stairs, it could have been Tom's house. Jim ran around each room, filling his bag with any food and money he could find. Suddenly, he cried out. It was a strange, frightened cry I ain't ever heard from any man before. I ran to where Jim was standing, but he turned me round and marched me back to the window we had first climbed through. "What is it, Jim?" I asked, frightened. "What's wrong?" Nothing," replied Jim, hurrying me back into the canoe. "I just think we've taken enough of these good people's bits and pieces." I knew there was something else, something Jim wasn't telling me, but I didn't push him. He seemed so frightened. Whatever it was that he had seen, it couldn't have been good. Chapter 7. As the floodwaters washed away, we gently sailed down the Mississippi. We stopped only at night to make camp. We swapped the canoe for a proper raft that we found bobbing in some reeds. Sometimes I would paddle while Jim rested. Sometimes he would paddle, and I would let my hand trail in the water. Too much time doing nothing got me thinking. Tom always said I thought too much, and maybe he was right. I started to think about whether what I was doing was the right thing. Widow Douglas had only ever tried to help me, and what had I done in return? I'd allowed her to think I was dead, and now I was helping one of her slaves to escape. I liked Jim, but I felt guilty. It was against the law for a slave to run away from their owner. As I was thinking, I noticed two men on the side of the river staring at us. "You!" one of the men shouted. He had a thick, red mustache and a cross-looking face. "You too! Come here this instant!" Jim stood up straight and stared at me, wild-eyed. "Should we ignore him?" Jim whispered. I shook my head. "Best not," I said. "Let's go and see what they want." Part of me wanted to tell the whole story to the men. Well, the bit about Jim's escape anyway. At least then, this feeling of guilt inside me would go away. I knew slavery wasn't right, but it was just the way things were. The two men pulled our raft to the riverbank. The man with the mustache handed the rope to his companion, a huge man with muscles thicker than my waist. He looked past me and stared at Jim. Jim couldn't meet his eyes. He stared down at the raft, and I could feel he was trying to make himself smaller, which was hard for a tall man like Jim. But Jim knew that, as a slave, he was at the mercy of this white man. It was safer for him to look weak and powerless in front of this man, even though he could probably pick him up in one hand. I didn't like it. Jim was a nice man, and he didn't deserve to feel like this. He was kind, and he loved his family. That was more than I could say for a lot of folks that were free to do what they wanted, including my own pet. "What are you fellas doing out here?" the man asked at last. "Nothing," I replied. "What are you doing with that slave?" the man continued, staring at Jim again. "There's been reports of a runaway back in St. Petersburg. You know anything about that?" I glanced at Jim, then back to the man. "No, sir," I said. "This here is my family slave." The man did not look as though he believed us. Panic started to rise up in my chest. "Is that so?" he said. "Yes," I said, suddenly coming up with a plan. "We're on our way to the next town to fetch the doctor." I started to cough. "My whole family has come down with the pox. Me and my slave are going for help." I coughed again in the direction of the man and...
We're gonna stop it right there, and I'm gonna ask you guys a question. What do you think will happen next? What do you think will happen next to Tom Sawyer and Jim? Will Jim be free? Will he be able to go home? Will we be able to free his family? We'll find out next time. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye. And I hope you enjoyed today's video. Bye. And don't forget my question to ask. Bye. Okay. And we're done. Yes, we are done. So, hope you have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.